Hi there class, this is Mr. Reimer. I'm going to be making a little tutorial video for you here today. So I'm going to be making a tutorial for how to do basic movement in Scratch. So Scratch is a block coding programming language, and right over here you can see I have my live preview window. So this is where the things that we have coded will occur, and then here in the center you can see that I have my sort of coding area where we're going to be dropping our codes. So the first thing we want to do is click on Mr. Scratch here. So we call him Sprite 1. You can see his name right down here. I'm going to name him Scratch. So I'm just going to click in the sprite name, call him Scratch. And he's the default sprite for this program. I'm also going to click down here where it says size, and I'm just going to set his size to 40. So about 40%, just to make him a little smaller so we can do a little bit more movement and a little bit more space here. So the first thing we want to do when we're doing movement is we want to give ourselves a little bit of a reference point. So if I click here on backdrops, I want to click down here on the green button that says choose a backdrop. So I'm going to click on that. Then I'm going to type into my search bar the word grid. And the reason I want to choose a grid is because this is going to help us understand how movement works in Scratch. So I want to choose this XY grid, the first one right here. So what you're going to notice is that now we have an XY grid on the screen. You'll notice there's some little coordinates written on here. And this is very, very similar to essentially a graphing grid in math. So the point right here at the center is X0, Y0. So that's the XY coordinate. In a 2D game, the position of everything on the screen is mapped using XY coordinates. So if we go all the way over here to the right, we have X 240, Y 0. So this line right here represents the 0, Y line. So X is our horizontal and Y is our vertical axis. So we have 0 here at the center, and then we also have negative 240 here for X on this side. Same thing goes for Y. We have positive Y 180 up here at the top and negative Y 180 there at the bottom. So if I click on Scratch and I just drag him over to kind of this intersection here, in his little sprite info palette over here, we can get a little bit of information. So we have his name, and we can see that his X coordinate is 102 and his Y coordinate is 101. We click and drag him down here. Now we're at X coordinate 105, Y coordinate 101, negative 101. So you'll notice that the X coordinate remains pretty much the same because we're dragging him just straight up and down, so his X value isn't really changing, but his Y value is changing. But if we drag him this way, we now are at X negative 4 and Y negative 98. And once again, moving back up there, X negative 101 and Y 104. And these are really important to know for when we start changing his movement. So let's get to actually getting Scratch moving around. So let's go to events. Events are the start of most of our codes. So they're the sort of the things that let us know that, or let the game know to begin running a section of code. We're going to just grab this when green flag clicked block. And this is the block that we use the most. It's the one I find is the least buggy as long as you sort of code it properly, and so that's one I prefer to use. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a control block. Now, control blocks are really important. And this particular one that we're going to add right here is called a forever block. So a forever block is a repeating block. You can see that it has this little arrow up right here that basically says go back to the beginning. So it's going to run what's inside it, and then it's going to go back to the beginning. And it's run what's inside it and go back to the beginning. So it's forever running a check. We're going to add an if-then statement. So this is one of the most common blocks that we use in Scratch coding. So it's if-then. And then we're going to add a little bit of a sensing block. It's a very basic sensing, and we're going to add a key space pressed. So basically, we're going to forever check to see if a key is being pressed. Once we've dropped it in there, we can actually just hit this little drop-down menu. And we're going to click on right arrow. So we're forever checking if the right arrow is pressed. And then we want something to happen. So we nest the next thing in there. So we want a motion. So you go up to the top here to motion. These are the blue blocks. And we want to change X by 10. So you'll remember when we were looking at this grid, we have XY coordinates. X represents our horizontal movement. So when I say change X by 10, what basically it's going to do is check inside Scratch for his current X coordinate, which is -99. And then if the right arrow is pressed, it's going to change that by 10. So let's give this a test. Click on the little green flag and go. And see it's changing in increments of 10. But he's only going right. Can't go left yet, so I got to click and drag him back. That is the start of movement. So let's add in another if statement. If sensing key space pressed. In this case, we're going to choose our left arrow. And once again, we're going to go motion. We're going to grab that same block as before. We're going to change X by 10. But we want it to go left, not right. It's the opposite of positive 10 if you're going on an XY grid, where X0 equals center. You want to change this to -10 because you're going -10 steps in the other direction. So let's run this and test it out. So right arrow key, he's moving right by 10 in increments of 10, and now he's moving left in increments of 10. So right and left is working. Very, very simple. Now it's important that when you're taking this if statement that you've made here, you do not put it inside the other if statement. You want to be putting these as separate if statements. If you start nesting them into each other, they're going to do different sorts of behaviors that you don't necessarily want. We are going to do some nesting, but this is not how we do basic motion. So, next thing we're going to do is add one more and one more. So now we have 4 total if statements. Each of these is going to control one of the buttons on the mouse. So, once again, drag down our sensing. We're going to do an up arrow, and we are going to do a down arrow. Now you'll remember left and right is on the X plane, or the X coordinates, so up and down is going to be on the Y coordinates. So we're going to change Y and change Y. So up arrow is going to change Y by +10, and down arrow is going to change Y by -10. Okay, let's give this a little test. Left, right, up, down. Okay, this is the very basics of movement in Scratch. So we now have all 4 directions. You always want to make sure left and right are X's and up and down are Y's. So we'll check back in the next video for how to do boundaries and a little bit of sensing.